Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joel Kurtzman.
Thank you, Henry. What a great introduction. And I think you actually gave my entire speech. So what I'd like to talk about, and I don't know whether it's the same in Kansas City as in Los Angeles or in Chicago or New York, but there is a feeling in the country that is so pessimistic at this particular time. I mean, people look at what has happened to the United States and they say, my God, we are in one of the worst shapes that we have ever been in. Our country, as Henry said, is hollowing out. The debt, all sorts of calamitous things are coming together at once. Now, I'm an optimist when I look at these same facts. That, I have to say, makes you these days something of a curiosity. And I've been interviewed, and you walk in for a TV interview or radio interview, and they look at you sitting there on the couch waiting to be interviewed, and they say, oh yeah, you're the optimist. Like it's a skin disorder or something that you're looking at the world from a different perspective. But I have to say I haven't always been an optimist. When I worked at the New York Times, I wrote a lot of stories about the economy back in the late 1980s and 1990s called eating our seed corn, the headwinds of recession, on and on and on, plus books that looked at the decline and crash of the American economy, the death of money, on and on. It made me so depressed just to read my own books. So it wasn't until really the last 4 or 5 years that I started looking very deeply at the underlying assumptions with respect to the economy, where we stand, where we're going, what our strengths are. And it made me sit back and take a different look. Then the events of 2012, the election, we all heard the phrase, we don't make anything here anymore. You go to a party, you talk to someone, sooner or later you hear that phrase, we don't make anything here anymore. So I looked into it very carefully, and the fact is, it's simply not true. It's become a sentence that people say again and again, but it's not true. The fact is, and I'll get into some of the details in a minute, but the fact is the United States is the largest manufacturing power in the world. Sometimes in some years, China catches up with us, but then we pull ahead. We produce 20% of everything made in the world, measured in dollar terms. And we do it with 4% of the world's population. So we're incredibly productive. Now, that phrase has been repeated, and it becomes, in some ways, the basis of policy, the way people invest, the way they organize their life, the advice they give to their kids about what to do when they grow up or go to school. But if you look at this Life magazine cover, by the way, I collect old magazines. I don't recommend it as a hobby. It is, for example, these magazines deteriorate, they get moldy, mildew, you sift through them, you end up sneezing. It's a bad hobby to have, and in the end, they don't increase in value. So, terrible hobby. But you look at this, you see 1963, July 19th, the headline of Life magazine says, automation's really here, jobs go scarce, point of no return for everybody. Now, what followed this 1963 article was 60 years of some of the most unprecedented job creation and economic growth the world has ever known. And yet this is the mindset. Now, it makes me think that within our country, this is a kind of, I don't know what you call it, neurosis in terms of how we look at the future. Whatever is the silver lining, we find the cloud. So here's why it matters. If you are strong, and the United States is very strong, I could have put a second very or even a third very in there because the United States is very, very, very strong, but make decisions as if you were weak, you will make bad decisions. I think that's our predicament. So if you think about the kinds of decisions you make when you're afraid, they tend to be bad decisions. Think about 2008. The stock market fell by 40%. Horrendous. A lot of people lost an enormous amount of money. The people who said, it's all over, I'm getting out, lost 40% of their savings. The people who said, you know, the United States is strong, we'll come back, they made their money back. What is more worthwhile, to be pessimistic, fearful, or to be optimistic? In my view, there are certain truths that you follow because the world works in certain ways, and that means, to me at least, that optimism is a better perspective. So if you think about the decisions we make from fear, the way we sometimes mistake prudence for fear, or fear for prudence, I should say, this gets us into trouble. So this is my perspective pretty much. And it is North America, with the US in the lead, is the world's center of creativity and innovation. Any measures will do. Any measures will do. New companies formed, Nobel Prizes received, R&D spending, attractiveness to high talent from anywhere, patents issued, and numbers of great universities. Now, I didn't say that. That was said by George Shultz, former Treasury Secretary, former Secretary of State, former Secretary, head of the Office of Management and Budget, professor, CEO, on and on and on, and now a fellow at the Stanford Hoover Institution, and that's what he says looking at the country. So this is a perspective I think that's worth taking into account. Now, my perspective is that there are four forces, generally ignored, that are powerful change agents. I would call them transformation agents, that are changing the United States before our eyes, and nobody is seeing it. We have boundless creativity. We have vast energy reserves now. We have manufacturing preeminence, as I mentioned, and we have huge reserves of capital. So if you look at this, let's take creativity first. This is a person I think only exists in America, Joichi Ito. Now, Joy, as he's called, was born in Japan. He went to University of Chicago, but dropped out. And he started to invest in the internet. He made a lot of money. He became very savvy. He went back to Japan. He started helping people in Japan invest in the internet. He came back to the United States. And he became someone who really connected people and saw the world differently. And as a result, he became renowned. Now, what did he become? Now, in most countries, he would be an interesting curiosity. He made money, he dropped out of school, okay. In the United States, MIT, probably one of the 2 or 3 most eminent universities in the world, made him the director of the Media Lab. That's the Media Lab is a research center at MIT that does biological research, it does research into computing, it does research into the brain, It's a very, very impressive organization. They made someone without a college degree the head of this prestigious organization because he had the kind of worldview they were looking for that would help position us for the future. Now that's a bold move. That's not possible in Europe. You will not find a university taking a risk like that. It's not possible in Asia, China, Japan. They won't take those risks. Now he may fail. He's only been in the job 2 years. He may fail. But we took the risk of having someone who we think sees the future be with the smartest people in the country and to help them and to bring in professors and researchers. We took that risk. Other countries don't. Now, this is a place in Massachusetts. I'm talking now about the area right around MIT, Kendall Square, about a 1 square mile area. If you look at this, the McGovern Brain Research Institute is the area. It's only a 2-year-old research center. They brought in people from all over the world. It has a gift of $350 million from Mr. McGovern to start this research center. It's linked to the Media Lab. They're doing incredible research already. And it is the centerpiece of this new global project on the brain, trying to figure out the brain. Kendall Square. That's where it's located. This researcher here, 33 years old, has 45 people working in his lab. That's a laser, it's not a toothbrush, by the way. That laser is being miniaturized. He takes viruses, he implants them with cell plasts from plants that turn green and produce chlorophyll and so forth. They go into the brain, they're part of a circuit in the brain. The viruses are modified. The laser goes inside. This is for epileptics. If a seizure starts, the little laser turns on, tiny, tiny laser. The cells start producing chlorophyll, and it shuts off that circuit, and the epilepsy goes away. Now, this is unbelievably complicated research. This guy is 33 years old. And, I was talking to him and I said, well, who's on your team? And he said, well, I have one person on my team, an engineer, who's a really interesting guy. His last project was designing a ski rack for a car so that you could drive into your garage, the ski rack would lift down onto the top of your car, take off the skis, and put them on the side of your garage. I said to him, Ed, his name is Ed Boyden, Ed, but what does that have to do with brain research? He said, no, it's the creativity I was looking for, and some of these movements are identical to what's needed when you do the insertion of these devices into the brain. No other country, no other university would try something like that. I mean, this is very risky research. It's very delicate. And he has someone who's designing parts for cars, essentially working on it, not because that's the job specification, but because he's a brilliant guy and understands the principles. No one else does that. So here we have, I know there's a big Sanofi plant here that bought Marion Labs. Sanofi bought Genzyme in the middle of Kendall Square. Genzyme is a pioneer in genetic research, one of the most advanced companies, and Genzyme is becoming the de facto research center for this French company. Now, I asked the CEO, who paid a lot of money, by the way, for this company, $19 billion. I asked him why he spent so much money to buy Genzyme. And he said, that's the price you have to pay to get into Cambridge, meaning Kendall Square. So there is something special going on in that 1 square mile of America that is not going on anywhere else, that a CEO would spend $19 billion to have a piece of. This is Novartis's research center. Now, this is a Swiss company, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Novartis moved its entire research center from Switzerland to Cambridge, to this 1 square mile area of America. The entire research center from around the world is now in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So this is an impressive move. Again, the reason is for the human capital, for the intelligence, for the creativity that we have that would allow us to do a crazy thing like put someone without a college degree in charge of a university laboratory. People want a piece of that. They can't do it at home. Now, the world would give anything for 1 Cambridge, 1 Kendall Square. We, in the United States, we have 10 of them. No one else has even 1. But we have San Francisco, San Diego, we have Austin, Texas. We have research centers in North Carolina, along the I-95 corridor in New Jersey. New Jersey always gets a bad rap, but they do have a lot of brilliant people along that I-95 corridor. We have them in Washington State. We have 10 world-class centers, and no one even has 1 that is really equivalent to any of these. We have 10. That's lost in the debate when we start talking about what's wrong with America. So it's not just work like biotech. These are robots. These robots are designed, they were designed by DARPA for the military. They will follow you. They can carry 400 pounds of stuff, and they will follow you wherever you go. These robots will ford streams. They will climb up muddy or snowy mountains. They will follow you. They're programmed to follow you. When you rest, they rest. No one can build this, but we can. Now, there are pictures of this that are videos that show these devices walking over ice. Now, in the middle of walking and losing its footing and regrouping and getting its footing, one of the designers goes over and pushes it as hard as he can. It kind of struggles just like you would or I would, and then it regains its footing, and it continues until it moves over across the ice. So this is a very special device designed in the United States, only in the United States. And we have a cluster, happens to be also in Boston, but there's another cluster that does robots. We also have that is in around Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. We have them at University of Pennsylvania. We have them all over. This is world-class stuff no one else is doing. Now, I bring this together because we are the leadership in tomorrow's technologies. We may be talking about what we left behind, if we've left anything behind. But for tomorrow, everyone has to catch up. If they want to do robots, if they want to do tomorrow's biotech, they have to come here. There's no other place where you can get that kind of depth and research, and most importantly, human capital. So I just want to talk about this group who I call, and other people call as well, the Pal Mafia. Now, everybody probably knows PayPal. If you buy something on eBay, they want you to pay with PayPal. Now, these six guys, designed PayPal. All the research behind it, they're the engineers and so forth. Of these 6 people, only 2 were born in the United States. The rest came here to work. They came here with, in many cases, to get education. They immigrated in order to breathe our air and get a taste of what we offer in terms of intelligence and creativity. So these 6 people founded PayPal. PayPal was eventually sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, and they split the proceeds. Now, if you look at these 6 guys, you have under USA, Jeremy Stoppelman. Jeremy, on the top left, after he left PayPal, started Yelp. Elon Musk in the middle, born in South Africa, he started Tesla, and then he started SpaceX, and then he started SolarCity. Max Levchin from the Ukraine became an investor. He's invested in a lot of different companies. Peter Thiel from Germany also became an investor. Reid Hoffman in the middle, USA, he started LinkedIn. And then we have Steve Chin from Taiwan, who started YouTube. Now these are all people who came here, they started companies. So let's look at how they did. PayPal was sold for $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money. These guys, these 6 guys, invested in each other's companies. So Max Levchin invested in LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman invested in Yelp, and so forth. So they all invested in each other's companies. They all invested in Tesla and SpaceX. Since then, their companies, the new companies, are worth $84 billion. Now that's of a couple of months ago. They may be worth more for all we know at this point, but they were worth, when I put this slide together, $84 billion. And what about the jobs? They created 61,294 jobs. That's how many jobs were created. And that's just the beginning, because the ages of these guys are late 30s, early 40s. So we're talking about a dynamism that is really monumental, and it goes unnoticed, but it's a kind of creativity that draws to our shores the best of the best. And people say, oh, well, we're going to educate them and they're going to go back to India or China. It's not really happening. That's fear again. People come here and stay, and they invest. Why? Because do you think that Tesla or SpaceX could be started in South Africa? They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the trained resources, they don't have consultants, they don't have venture capitalists, they don't have this gigantic network of assistance that we have built up since World War II to support our innovation machine. That takes 60, 70, 80, 100 years to build. And we built it. The Chinese want something like this. They have invested tons of money in genetics. They bought half of the gene sequencers in the world. They have them operating in Beijing and Shanghai, and so far, no results. You can't just buy the machines and expect to be world class. It takes a lot of people working together. So now you say, okay, I hope I made the case that this is, without a doubt, the most creative country in the world, and there's no sign that that's diminishing. And you say, okay, what else is going on? Well, energy. If you look at this slide was produced by the Congressional Research Service, December 28, 2012. Now, I remember stuff like that. It's useless, but it's something I remember. And what it shows, if you can't see, is United States has the largest deposits of oil and gas in the world. We have, number 2 is Russia, number 3 is China, and way down here is Saudi Arabia. So that's what we have. Now, most of this stuff was not available. It was in the ground. It was locked in various kinds of rock, shale, and so forth. It couldn't be gotten out except up for a ton of money. It was dangerous. The methane would leak into the atmosphere. It would leak into the water. This is how that technology works, essentially, in a very, very crude way. But they drill down a couple of miles or more, 3 or 4 miles, 5 miles down, and then they turn the drill, and they drill horizontally. They put down sleeves of cement, steel, to reinforce it, and then they start blowing little holes in the rock, and then that natural gas or oil seeps out, goes up the top, and gets captured. Now, this was not a government project, despite what the president said, that figured this out. This was, at the time, he died last year at 94 years old, George Mitchell, the son of immigrants in Texas, who just happened to be a brilliant kid, got a PhD in engineering, geology, and figured out this process on his own, invested his own money after having been a successful oil and gas man, invested his own money and perfected the technology within the last decade. So this is brand new. Now, it's only since 2008 that we've harnessed this and used it in a big way. But look at what we have to draw upon. These are the deposits in the United States and Canada, some in Mexico, of oil and natural gas. This is in California, here's in North Dakota. This is an immense area of wealth, and it's in the United States. It's all accessible now with this new technology, and I believe this technology is safe if it's done properly. It does not pollute if it's done properly, and it gives us an immense amount of resources. So just look at this one chart. This is production in Texas. And here you see the advent of fracking right here, and you see it's almost straight up in terms of how much production there is. This is Texas. This is not, we're not talking about Nebraska or someplace with no resource. We're talking about Texas and this straight line. So this is having an immensely powerful effect on the United States. And here, this is a chart that shows our imports of oil. I hope I'm not overloading you with charts. But if you look here, this is how much oil we have been importing. 60%, essentially 60% in 06 and 07. Now we're only importing 32%. That's a very short time to go from being completely dependent on the rest of the world and sending as much as $350 billion a year to Saudi Arabia and places that we don't really necessarily love. That $350 billion in the span of 10 years or so is going to stay here. Now, just imagine that it stays in the United States. Now, not all of it will. It'll be used globally as well. But suppose all of it stays in the United States and is invested. Well, we have conservatively 100 years of supply. And some of the real optimists who look at the technology and say, well, this technology is actually evolving and getting better, talk about as much as 200 or 300 years of supply. So imagine investing $350 billion for 100 years in the United States. Think it would make a difference? It's profound. So you take the industrial and creative might of the United States and put Saudi Arabia on top, and that's what our future is going to look like. That creativity mixed with that wealth. Now, this is already happening. You see that this immensely powerful line here shows job creation that is related to oil and natural gas as a result of this new technology. It's already over 1 million people. are working in this field who were doing something else or out of work before. And in the next decade, at least 1 million more will be working in this field in high-paying jobs, welding, building pipelines, building refineries, very high-paying jobs, as our new source of wealth matures. They'll also be building ports in order to export this, and it will put the United States in a very different perspective from a geopolitical point of view, because we won't need to import. So you take what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. In the past, we had to be very fearful in a way because Russia is such a large gas producer. Countries are dependent on them. But now we produce more gas, natural gas, than Russia. We have plans underway to create 15 terminals so that we can sell to Europe and take care of its gas needs, and we could shut Russia out of the market. Now, when most of our energy for the world came from the Middle East, the United States had the burden, if you ask me, of defending the sea lanes, protecting that oil, making sure terrorists didn't blow it up, fighting wars, and so forth. Since the late 70s, 1977, we spent $7.3 trillion defending the Middle East. Half our deficit went to defending the Middle East. We're not going to have to do that anymore. Now the Middle East becomes a strategic choice we can make, not an obligation. So let's talk about manufacturing, because a lot of people, of course, say we don't make anything here anymore. But here's a little fact. This is productivity. United States manufacturing workers produce on average $132,000 per worker. According, this is a Japanese study. The average in the rich countries is 71,000. So we're about 40% more productive than the rest of the rich countries. We're much more productive, 5 or 6 times, than China. So our productivity is soaring. It has not stopped. It's always, when you're dealing with productivity, it's difficult because we can do more with less, and that includes less people. But it also means that we are a better and better place to manufacture. So on the one hand, you lose, on the other hand, you gain. So our productivity is second to none. Now look at this. This is China. This is Foxconn. This is where they make iPads, iPods, things like that. So you look, each of these workers works a shift, gets paid $6,000 a year, so that's $18,000 a year approximately for 3 shifts, assuming they're working 3 shifts. But these people obviously need some benefits, at least some. They need some kind of health coverage. They get difficulties with their wrists. It's repetitive work. There's suicides. There's violence. There's all kinds of things that go on in these mega factories with thousands and thousands of people. But this is basically the way we're making things now. Now here is Baxter. Baxter can be programmed by anyone. It's made in Massachusetts. I'm not here to boost Massachusetts, by the way. But it's made in Massachusetts, costs $22,000, and it works 3 shifts. And it's $22,000 if it lasts 3 years or 5 years. It's not going to last longer. 3 or 4 years is the lifespan. So these robots, which anyone can program, are much more efficient than that line of people at Foxconn. And they're made here, and they're made simply, and they contain software that's written here in terms of the code and so forth. This is the future, not that. Now, I look at China and I say, of all the times to come of age China, unfortunately, is coming of age at probably the worst particular time. And that's because the kind of manufacturing here is dying out. It's being replaced by this. And people still have to make these products, but they're a whole different order of magnitude. They require creativity, intelligence, education, and so forth to produce. Now, if your goal in China is to move 200 million people into the cities per decade to work in factories, you're going to find, unfortunately, that there's not going to be the work. The work's going to be here, and it's already starting to come back. So as of September 2013, this is my tally, 89 manufacturing plants, mostly related at this stage to the natural gas bonanza, because you can use natural gas to make plastics and agricultural products and so forth. 89 plants either broke ground or were about to break ground, worth $65 billion. It's all coming here because of the cheap natural gas. BASF, German company, largest chemical manufacturer in the world, said the only place you can manufacture chemicals now is the United States. It's the only place that makes economic sense. Dow Chemical, BASF, they're bringing their plants back from the Middle East to be here, to make products here. So this is automobiles. We have $1.5 billion in upgrades. I spelled Detroit wrong, sorry about that. In automobiles, just from GM. This is upgrades here. And it includes a factory for the first time in decades being built in Detroit. And the total without that $1.5 billion upgrade is $13 billion invested in new plant capacity in the US. Now look at this. This is BMW. BMW only makes its SUVs wherever they sell them in the United States. This is one of their largest factories ever. This is larger than most of their factories in Germany. And it only makes its SUV line of products here because of our productivity, because of our market. We have 450 million people between Mexico and the north of Canada. It's the richest market in the world, and they want to sell their SUVs here. So they're making them here, not just because of the market, because they export them, but also because of the productivity. Now here's Mercedes. Mercedes is making 5 classes of its vehicles here in the United States, in Alabama. 5 classes. It was a big secret, but they finally announced they're going to make their C-Class car, entry level, I guess, Mercedes, in the United States. So we're seeing the benefit of our productivity. Now here's something, this is a little disturbing, but this is the new wave. This is, we're now able, thanks to a new technology devised in Texas, to print out products. So you don't need to have a factory anymore. You can have a printer at home. You want to make jewelry, you want to make a dress, you want to make something like that. You download the software and you print it out on your 3D printer. Now, someone may have the bright idea to make an automatic rifle on one of these things, and then put the software up on the web so that you can download it and you can turn your rifles into automatic. This got a lot of attention, but they're not selling the software anymore. This is the device here. This is as simple as it gets. You put in the software, you print out the part you want. Now, the reason I bring that up is because you think about AutoZone. Now, there are AutoZones and there are companies like this around the world. So if you're in need of a spare part, in the future, you're not going to have to go to the AutoZone to buy that part for your car. You're just going to print it out at home. The latest printer, 3D printer, that is on the market was announced today, made here in the United States, $299. and it'll print anything. So we're talking about a new era of disruption, change, and we're talking about that creativity harnessed, and we're talking about it being harnessed here. And when it goes to the rest of the world, it's going to be a big surprise. So the final force that I want to talk about is capital. But before I do, this is essentially the growth that we have experienced since World War II. If you look right here, this is the recession of 2008. Little tiny dip in an otherwise 70-year-long period of growth. That has now resumed. It's not straight up like oil and gas, but growth has resumed. And if you look at it in historical context, this is quite a nice history to have for your economy. So we suffered, and many people really suffered badly from that 2008 recession, terribly. But if you look at assets that households have, before the recession, we had 62 trillion. That's 10 times the size of the Chinese economy. Individuals in America had that much wealth. This 62 trillion is now 65 trillion. So we've pretty much recovered everything we've lost, and we're still, just in terms of our household wealth, 10 times the size of the Chinese economy. And if you look here at the national debt, now we make a big thing about the national debt, and it's not a subject that doesn't get people excited, of course. It's not a subject that we can treat lightly. But the indicators I use to look at the national debt is this. How much of our GDP, how much of everything that we make, how much of all the economic activity in the country do we need to use in order to service that debt? That has gone down steeply. So the amount of our economy devoted to servicing that debt is going down. Now here's the analogy. Two guys named, one named Larry Page and the other named Sergey Brin, started a little company that originally was called BackRub, crazy name, in Silicon Valley. BackRub didn't get off the ground immediately. They put a lot of money on their credit cards. $50,000 on their credit cards. That was a lot of debt for these two kids to put. But they believed in their product. They changed the name from BackRub to Google. And that over time, that $50,000 of debt didn't look so bad. I mean, if you have billions, 50,000, they didn't even have to pay it all off. They could have just paid the interest every month, and big deal. It would not have been something even they noticed. Now, we don't ever really pay back our debts. We never really do, let's be honest. We just make them smaller and smaller as a percentage of our GDP. And that's what's going to happen now. And if you look here, that's starting to happen already. It's happening with how much we pay out to service that debt. And over years, as we grow and grow at that rate I just showed you, that debt is going to be smaller and smaller. And the amount we pay on it is going to shrink as well. Now, this is controversial, I know. And I can see not everybody agrees with me. People do like to cherish this notion about how dangerous debt is. But let me just say one thing. The idea that debt is dangerous is ancient. It goes back to the Bible, actually. And it came of age when economies did not grow. The economy of, let's say, 500 BC was the same size as the economy of 300 BC. It didn't grow. Now, if you were in an environment where there's no growth, man, debt is a real problem. It consumes you. But if you're in an environment where you're growing rapidly, and I think we will be, that debt becomes more manageable and it becomes smaller as a share of your wealth. So households during this period, look at this. Households have the lowest household debt in 35 years. That debt that people feel, credit cards and so forth, that's really collapsed. People have become much more frugal and much more prudent. If you look at savings rates, here you go. Americans are saving now at world-class levels. We're like every other country. People used to laugh at us and say, oh, Americans don't save anything. And that was true for a while, but we're back up there with the rest of the world, saving more and more. And if you look at reserves, now this is what banks hold for, what the Federal Reserve holds for banks. So if you look at, think about it this way. Banks lend money to small businesses and to homeowners. And if they keep that money in their bank, in the Federal Reserve, that money's not going to get lent. So right now, the Federal Reserve has $1.7 trillion in excess reserves. They haven't requested the banks to put that money on deposit with them. We have the Kansas City Fed right up the street that's holding tens of billions of dollars for banks. That money's not being lent. That's going to be lent at some point, and when it does, it's going to revive the economy in a very strong way. We're just not there yet. Confidence has not returned. If you look at corporate assets, we're talking about the amount of money companies have, they haven't spent. Look at this line, 5 trillion, a little bit less, I think, but 5 trillion almost in corporate cash is sitting on the sidelines. Here's another view. I put it at more like 4.4 trillion. Well, 4.4 trillion, you know, it's just a number, but it's bigger than the economy of Germany. That's how much cash is sitting on the sidelines. Some of that is in Europe. It's being held in Europe and in Asia because companies are afraid if they bring it back, it'll get taxed. There's a lot of uncertainty at the rate and so forth. It's going to get taxed, so they're leaving it overseas. Once there is tax reform for corporations, my guess is that 4.4 trillion is going to be put to work. Now that's going to be a big news. So let's put it all together. So we have the most creative country in the world that just can't stop thinking of new ideas, no matter what. Maybe it's a little down in the mouth in terms of its mood. Maybe there's a lot of pessimism, but it's still creative. We have abundant energy, more than anyone in the world now. And we are returning to our powerhouse status, not that we ever really left it, in manufacturing. It's coming back. GE, all these companies are bringing back their manufacturing from Asia. It didn't work. It wasn't as profitable as making it here. They got the numbers wrong. And then you say we have trillions of dollars to invest that's going to be invested in the economy. So there's one missing element in all of this. And then if we have time, I'll open it for questions. And that one missing element is confidence. You feel it and you see it everywhere. It's like people talking to me like, oh, you're the optimist, huh? Well, sit over there. We don't have the confidence right now. Part of it might be this pernicious, toxic debate going on in Washington. A lot of people feel that way, that it's Washington-driven. Some of it is just aftermath of the 2008 crash, which is already now 5 years old, 6 years almost. Some of it is just that there are a lot of people in the media who make a lot of money scaring people like us about the future. And it's a big business to keep people afraid. But when you think about, you talk to people from Europe or Asia and you say, what's the single defining characteristic of Americans that make them different from the rest of the world. It's certainly not that we are better educated, at least K through 12. We have problems finding different countries on the map. We still do. It's not that we're better at sports. I mean, we ended up getting beaten in baseball by Cuba. So I hate to say that. I know there's a team here. So it's not sports. What is it? People say, and you hear it again and again, well, Americans are so optimistic. It's one of our fundamental traits. We look at the world and say, we can fix it, we can make it better. And there are two words that have kind of left the English language, at least the American language, that I used to hear all the time as a kid, and that's can do. If you remember the can do spirit, we're the can do nation. Remember that? That is how it used to be, and that's what's holding us back. So I think that we'll get there. I believe that the optimism, people will start to have confidence enough in the future to put their money to work. They won't be so skittish in the stock market. They'll be a little more consistent. They'll start thinking longer term when they start seeing some of the benefits from energy and so forth. And when that happens, our country is going to soar. There is no way to stop it with these attributes here. I'm not making this up. There is no way to stop this. They may slow it down, they may make us sick of them in Washington, but they're not going to stop this. It's too big and too powerful. So if there are any comments or questions? Thank you. I'm sorry?
Repeat the question.
Okay, I will. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a rare optimist. Robert Reich would say that the middle class is not able to participate in much of this wealth that you express. The productivity gains that you've shown are well known, that America is very productive, but Robert Reich would say the middle class is no longer participating in that. The wealth recovery that you mentioned, where we come back and then some to the 2008 gains, is concentrated in the 1% or 2%, and it's typically stock gains. Do you see that social issue as headwind in here, or how would you fold that in with your analysis?
So the question was, what is the headwind? What about the fact that the 1% and higher are getting so much of the gains? What about the fact that the middle class is not participating in this upward movement? And that's an easy question, thanks. No, let me put it this way. First of all, the middle class actually is participating. It's not participating like the 0.001% who have billions and billions of dollars, but it has been participating. And let me put it this way. The whole thing, in my view, is reduced down to education. If you had a bachelor's degree and you had some experience, not right out of college, but a bachelor's degree with some experience, and you were in the 2008 period, unemployment for you was about 4.2%. It did not change through that whole recession period. Unemployment stayed the same for people with college degrees. For people without college, it was very, very negative. So I don't know how to put it, but the middle class has benefited. The middle class did not lose ground, but the people who did not have the education lost tremendously. Now, they're the last to get rehired because they have the fewest skills. So if you think about what's going to happen as we become wealthier, people will start buying houses again. That's starting. That's construction. We're going to have to build those ports to export natural gas. That's going to hire people who are unemployed. We're going to also be hiring more and more people to work in the fields and so forth. So I think there's a lag. And the people who have been left out are going to come back. But it has obviously, because we had so much money printed, so much of that went into the capital markets rather than into direct investment. The people who were adept at finance really did well. Probably, you could argue too well, or you could argue that's the way it is.
What was the great university research complex that your map showed in Utah?
In Utah, what was the research complex in Utah? It's around the university, Salt Lake, and there is some really forefront research being done. It goes all the way back to research that was done on artificial kidneys and heart valves. Medtronics is one of those. So I'm really talking actually not so much about Salt Lake, I'm talking about Minneapolis. So maybe the map was unclear.
It was in southern Utah on your map.
Well, I'm just one of those Americans who can't find Minneapolis on the map. No, it was, thank you for correcting me. So it's Minneapolis is the place where there is enormous research going on.
You showed the savings rate has come back up, but I couldn't see what it was as a percentage of personal income.
It's up at 5 plus. It's not at the 10% of China, but China doesn't have Social Security. It doesn't have retirement accounts. So for the kinds of benefits we have, it's very high. Yes?
There's been a suggestion in some of the business news outlets that if we get stuck supplying the natural gas to Western Europe and Central Europe that Russia is threatening to take away, it will have a negative impact on our growth potential.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So the question is, if we supply Europe in particular with natural gas, won't that hurt our growth? Well, think about it this way. First of all, we're not going to give it away. We're going to sell it. So we're going to have money coming in from having sold that natural gas to Europe. So that's a plus. We will have some higher prices as a result domestically, which will predominantly affect the plastics and chemicals business because the feedstock price will go up slightly. But there have been studies that have looked at this, and the impact is very minimal, 1 or 2%.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head which studies?
I'll have to get that to you. Yeah. Yes?
You mentioned money printing. How does monetary policy and these 4 factors interrelate?
Well, the question is, how does monetary policy interact with these 4 factors? So I think we had a kind of problem in the economy coming out of this recession. We ended up with essentially Congress saying, we're not going to do anything more. We've had it with the fiscal stimulus. We're done. The rest, if you want to do it, Fed, it's up to you. Now, the interaction there is that when you're printing money and you're making all this capital available, the easiest and quickest place for that capital to go is into the capital markets. So that's what essentially drove up the share prices last year 30% in terms of stock market and so forth. So the monetary policy, I think, has been effective, but with a caveat, and that caveat is that unlike fiscal policy, where you say we need to build a port and everybody benefits from that because we're all shipping and receiving at that port, when you have monetary policy, it's very focused on capital markets and you get the benefits concentrated.
Will these 4 factors have an impact on the possibility of inflation due to monetary policy?
We've had an interesting effect. We have had a lot of growth in the monetary supply. We've had very low interests, and we've had almost no increase in demand. And yet we haven't seen inflation yet. What we're seeing is the reverse. We're seeing, even with almost 0 interest rates, people from abroad still want to put their money in the United States. The value of the dollar has gone up during this period where the textbooks say it should have gone down. So what the impact of monetary policy will be on these 4 factors, I think it's going to make capital available. If that capital is invested in production, I don't think we'll have inflation, at least not much inflation. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about basic research? Evidently, the government has reduced their funding about 15 or 20%. Will private investors pick this up, or do they need to?
Well, the question is, what about the government having backed off on some of the spending on R&D? I think that, first of all, the most productive thing a government can do is education and making money available for R&D. Some of it gets wasted, some of it goes into projects that are foolish and silly, but we have had, say, from DARPA, we've had everything from the Saturn engines that took people to the moon to the drones to various kinds of GPS systems, all out of government research. We've had immense benefit from it. I think it's dangerous to stop and start funding of research, no matter who does it. Because you can't just, if you're doing genetics research, if you're trying to cure cancer, if you're doing a study, a long-term study, and you stop it in the middle, you can't resume it. You have to, it's very difficult to resume it. You almost have to start over. So I think it's dangerous, and I think that some of these cutbacks, and the ideal is just keeping them flat so they don't increase or decrease. That's the goal, at least right now. I think that could be dangerous. Yes, right there, yes?
If you're an owner of capital, what would motivate you to forward your productive numbers more? And what would be the motivation? Tax rates. Towards, instead of speculative, actually investing into production.
So the question is, what would motivate you if you're a capitalist to invest more in your workers, and also to have you agree to higher taxes? Well, the second point on higher taxes, nobody agrees, and hasn't since Roman times. Nobody likes to pay taxes, but we all have to. It's fortunately or unfortunately not a decision individuals make. So that's going to come from whatever time we have a sensible Congress and they look at the whole tax policy situation, which is a mess. I mean, we can't have 25,000 pages of tax rules. But that's just, okay. The other point is shortage of trained workers. That's what's going to raise wages. Yes?
Well, that's where I kind of want to allude to. I'm a recruiter, and we just do not have the talent here in America that the companies are demanding right now. I mean, I got job orders out of the kazoo, and there's no way to fill the job. So we really need more foreign workers here because we do not have adequate talent here in America to fill the job. So what do you think about lifting it so that we bring more foreign workers to the work?
So the question is, there are more jobs than trained people and educated, I would presume. What about immigration, making it easier? Well, I showed you that chart where the Pal Mafia, 4 immigrants, 2 born here, have created $84 billion of value and 64,000 plus jobs. That's what immigrants can do. I think we need them. I think when people come to MIT to study, they ought to get a green card to stay. They don't want to go home. We make it so difficult. I know a lot of people who went to MIT and they talk about the hurdles that they had to traverse to stay here. It's unconscionable. These people create wealth. They are patriotic. They want to hire people and they want to make things here. So at that level, educated people, I think we ought to open the door. Last question? Yes.
So the last thing you talked about was we need to become confident. And so I gather from your presentation that it seems like the middle class with a college degree and people past that who have plenty of money should be confident. Can be pointed out with like the increase in wealth for Americans, or as you talked about, the unemployment rate stayed steady for people with degrees. So how do people who are in the middle class without a college degree, or people in the lower class, become confident? So you pointed out like Baxter will take over Foxconn because they can replace it, it's cost effective for multiple years. How does Baxter like 3.0 not like take over the big three in Detroit and replace people there who don't need a college degree? So like, how did those people become confident when it seems like our manufacturing growth points in a direction that puts those people out of a job?
So the question is essentially, how do people become confident when manufacturing is going to be automated? And I just want to go back to one of my first slides here, because it tells the whole story, if you ask me. If I can find that slide, sorry for taking all this time, but just, here it is. 1963, people thought the same thing. This article is about automation. It's about computers coming into the factory. It's about how those computers are going to take away jobs. It's fear-mongering, point of no return for everybody. And it was followed by decades of job growth, income increases, and whole new sectors. When this article was written, there was no biotech. There was no advanced manufacturing. There were no robots, except science fiction robots. Now these things are commonplace. There was no self-driving car. There was no Google. There were no personal computers. They got it wrong because they said this dreary present where I'm having trouble is infinite. And the fact is, it's not. It changes. And the future is based on what we know, not on anything that's set in stone. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. That was really great. Unleashing the Second American Century is for sale. Joel touched on just a few points. There's wonderful narratives, great stories in there, great case studies. I recommend it highly. He'll be outside signing copies, and we'll see you next time.